structural violence, right? The idea, this assumes you know structural violence. I can't get into a description of structural violence if you don't know what it is. But the idea is there is hope in the population that the institution will and is there to service the needs of the population. That assumption in and of itself serves then, potentially in a bad sense, as the conditions for the exploitation of the population itself. It's the belief, I erased it, it's the belief that the institution is there to satisfy and service the needs of the population that itself undermines and delegitimizes, devalues itself, right? The population naively assumes that, of course, the bureaucracy is there to service our needs. We're in charge of the bureaucracy, especially in the democratic state, right? We're in charge of the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is there to answer our needs, right? Those in political power and those decision makers that we have elected, free will, are there to exercise and vote on behalf of their constituents. They're there to service the needs of the constituents. The point is that we're not just talking about individuals, but we're talking about the organization and the institutions in place. Those organizations and institutions are always prone to the manipulation of a few or many, to the disservice, not the service, but the disservice of the people that it's there to serve. So, quick example, and then I'll just stop with this bit of this line of reasoning. Quick example is the idea of welfare. There's some legitimacy to the idea of welfare in a system. However, the idea of perpetual welfare, there's also a good argument that it reinforces a passivity in the population and a dependency in the population. And that dependency inherently undermines the autonomy of the collective population. It's very deep, but that's critical. That's critical. I can't do any more because I don't want to go too far off tangent. Number 5, the methods of truth were not invented for motives of truth. The methods were not invented for motives of truth, but for motives of power. The methods of truth, I gotta remember that for myself. That's ridiculous. Put a star on 5, right? I'm gonna go back to that later today. That's a powerful line. I do these lectures, I prepare them and everything, and pick the lines, but then I forget because there's so many of them. That's a good one. And I want to go back in the original and bold it. The methods of truth were not invented for motives of truth, but for motives of power, of wanting to be superior, right? In terms, this is so ridiculous. That's so good. In terms of, I'm thinking about some other stuff that I'm going to apply, but I'm going to stick on Nietzsche. In terms of Nietzsche, we know earlier Nietzsche introduces the role of the sacerdotal class, the priestly class. The priestly class is directly connected to absolute truth. God and you are serviced, your communication through the priest. Therefore, the idea, as he says, the method of accessing truth, you going through the priest to get to truth, is not for, it was not invented for truth. It was invented for power, because there has immediately been a new strata of person, or caricature, really, created that you need to access to get to some greater understanding. That elevates that individual. And that individual is part of a subsystem of greater systems, right? So you immediately create a hierarchy, and there is arguably some detriment to that. That's just ridiculously powerful. But how is truth proved? By the feeling of enhanced power. How do you know that it's true? You don't know that it's true because you are seeking an absolute, according to Nietzsche. Insofar as you seek an absolute, he says you'll never be able to find it. It's not there in the world to be found. The absolute truth isn't there. It's not accessible to be found. What do you end up doing? You find some semblance of this absolute truth in an individual person. And that person then is elevated. So not just to knock on the priests in the priestly class, but so I want to give a couple examples, so it's not like a Christian bashing phenomenon, even though Nietzsche would approve of that. I don't so much. So you have the sacerdotal class as an example. In a contemporary sense, I would say the motivational speaker. I definitely like the idea of motivational speaking. I think I'm very good at it. But I'm also very wary of the sort of genre of motivational speaking, because that crap gets really, really hokey, right? It almost becomes like the guru or cult figure. More examples, right? The guru, the cult figure, the motivational speaker, the priestly class. I have access to some absolute truth in 12 steps, in a formula, in 24 days, in 30 days, in XYZ. You can get the knowledge that I have for $19.99. Order right now, right? It's the same structure, right? It really is the same template, and the template is there is an absolute way to be fit, to be smart, to be healthy, to be happy, to be properly married, to be a good dad or mom, to raise your children a certain manner, and I have access to that absolute knowledge. You can gain access to that knowledge for a fee, or you can gain access to that knowledge for your penance, right? It's that idea. Number six, 457, detailed explanation. What is it, 457? Oh, I'm not going to read all of 457. Oh, martyrs, right. I'm actually going to leave that, to you. I would recommend you read 457. I'm looking at my clock, and I don't have much more time, and I don't want to break this section up into any more time over an hour. I don't want to spend more than an hour on section 14. So I'll just read the bits that I have underlined in section 457. It's on martyrs, right? The martyrs to truth. I'll read this bit. These immoralists, second paragraph, these immoralists should be forgiven for always having posed as martyrs to truth. The truth is that it was not the drive to truth which made them negate, but disintegration, sacrilegious skepticism, pleasure and adventure. In other cases, it is personal rancor that drives them into the domain of problems they combat. Problems in order to be in the right against particular people. Next paragraph. Truth, that is to say, the scientific method, was grasped and promoted by those who divided in it a weapon of war, an instrument of destruction. He's all over the place in this section, of course, because he's Nietzsche. Further down, the words conviction, faith, the pride of martyrdom. These are the least favorable states for the advancement of knowledge. The opponent of truth, at last, re-accepts the entire subjective manner of deciding questions of truth, namely by poses, sacrifices, heroic resolutions, and thus prolong the dominion of anti-scientific method. As martyrs, they compromise their own deeds. That's the main point, right? I don't want to actually spend time on that because it's a little different in terms of tenor with respect to what I've discussed up until this point, but just a super quick assessment of that, because I want to make sure I get to 7 in time. The idea is this, and I'm also writing on this too, so I don't want to put too much out of it because my own ideas are sort of entwined with this. So let me stick strictly Nietzsche. The idea is that the martyr is motivated by a particular truth, an absolute truth. The martyr recognizes that insofar as he or she is willing to literally sacrifice his body, her body, for this absolute truth, then there is a relationship between my sacrifice and not just the belief, not just what I've done, but the absolute truth. The last line of this says, as martyrs, they compromise their own deeds. As martyrs, they compromise their own deeds. The question is, how is that? Right? I always ask, how? Why is an interesting question, but I'm not a historian. So I always ask, how? How is it the case that as a martyr, you compromise your deeds? How is that claim true? Well, that claim is true. I undermine my own deeds. Insofar as I sacrifice my life, I don't have epistemological accessibility to